On April 15, 2026, Donald Trump stood in front of cameras and declared victory. The war with Iran, he said, was essentially over. Iran had been defeated. America had won. The mission was accomplished. It was a moment of triumphant certainty from a president who had promised the war would be short, decisive, and clean. Fast forward to May 12, 2026. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is sitting in a congressional hearing room, facing a wall of senators and representatives, Democrats and Republicans, who want to know one thing. If the war is over and America has won, why does the Pentagon just admit the bill went from $25 billion to $29 billion? Why is the Harvard Kennedy School saying it will hit $1 trillion? And why, if Iran is defeated, are Americans still paying $4.52 a gallon for gas? Today, we are going inside the most explosive congressional confrontation of this entire conflict. We are going to show you the gap between what the White House is claiming and what the numbers actually say. And we are going to ask the question that the administration desperately does not want anyone to ask. What exactly did America get for $29 billion? And counting. To understand why Congress is furious, you have to understand the timeline of what the Trump administration has claimed versus what has actually happened. President Trump announced major combat operations against Iran on February 28, 2026, with massive joint U.S.-Israeli strikes targeting military, government, and infrastructure sites. Within days, the White House was projecting confidence. This would be short, 4 to 6 weeks, clean objectives. American power would force Iran to the table. On April 15th, Trump declared the war over. Then on Fox Business said it was very close to being over and attacks could continue. 6,000 more troops and the USS George H.W. Bush were ordered to the region. Over. But more troops. Over. But more ships. Over. But still fighting. The contradictions were so stark that even some of Trump's own supporters in Congress started asking questions. Vietnam. Then came the financial reckoning. The Pentagon told Congress the first 6 days alone cost $11.3 billion, nearly $1.9 billion per day, $21,800 per second. All borrowed money added to a $38 trillion national debt. Congress absorbed that number. Then came the first official estimate, $25 billion. Then, 2 weeks later, $29 billion. Acting Pentagon Controller Jules Hurst told Congress the estimate has climbed from the $25 billion he provided lawmakers nearly 2 weeks ago because of updated repair of equipment costs and also just general operational costs to keep people in theater. The war that was over in April now costs $29 billion and is still running. And Congress, on both sides of the aisle, had had enough. Vietnam. Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. The hearing on May 12th was unlike anything Washington has seen since the post-Iraq WMD investigations. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Dan Kane arrived to testify at a House Appropriations Subcommittee budget hearing. Subcommittee Chairman Ken Calvert, a California Republican, and Ranking Member Betty McCollum, a Democrat from Minnesota, opened the hearing expressing bipartisan worry over the Pentagon's budget requests. They repeated their request that the Trump administration offer a more detailed breakout of what the war costs and how the Pentagon would spend any budget increase. The subcommittee needs to understand how the resources requested in this budget translate into real, measurable improvements in warfighting capability, Calvert said, adding that he has serious concerns about the request. Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. When Republicans and Democrats agree that the administration isn't being transparent, that is not a partisan moment. That is an accountability moment. And accountability is exactly what Hegseth tried to avoid. Representative Pete Aguilar asked Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth when Congress would get a more detailed accounting of war costs. "When it's relevant and required, we will share it," Hegseth responded. "When it's relevant and required." The war has been going for 74 days. The bill has jumped $4 billion in 2 weeks. Harvard says it will hit $1 trillion. And the defense secretary thinks Congress doesn't need a detailed accounting yet. Al Jazeera Congressman Ro Khanna unleashed one of the most dramatic confrontations in the hearing room, directly challenging Hegseth. You don't know what we paid in terms of the missiles that hit the Iranian school. You don't know what we're paying in terms of gas. You don't know what we're paying in terms of food, Khanna told Hegseth. Your $25 billion number is totally off. Khanna's argument is that the government's accounting is deliberately narrow, designed to make the war look cheaper than it actually is by excluding the economic damage it is causing to ordinary Americans. Khanna claimed the war would cost about $631 billion, or some $5,000 per household, to the U.S. economy due to increased gas and food prices. $5,000 per household. Not from a bill, not from a tax. From the invisible, relentless cost of a closed Strait of Hormuz, elevated oil prices, and supply chain disruptions rippling through every sector of the American economy. Wikipedia. And then there was the bombshell from the Senate side of the Capitol, happening simultaneously. A senior intelligence official told the Senate Armed Services Committee that Iran is frighteningly close, weeks, a small number of weeks, away to enrich uranium to weapons-grade levels. There's still a weaponization process that happens after that, but they're quite close to constructing nuclear weapons. Wait, the administration declared the war was over, Iran was defeated, the mission was accomplished. And on the same day the Pentagon was defending its $29 billion bill to the House, a senior intelligence official was telling the Senate that Iran is weeks away from nuclear weapons capability. If Iran is defeated, why is this happening? If the war achieved its objectives, why is the nuclear threat still red alert? IEEE spectrum. That contradiction between the victory claims and the nuclear reality is at the heart of what Congress cannot get a straight answer on. Trump wrote in a letter to Congress on May 1, 2026, "The hostilities that began on February 28, 2026, have terminated." Terminated. But the ceasefire is described by Trump himself as being on massive life support. Terminated. But a shadow drone war continues with Kuwait, the UAE, and Iran all reporting drone interceptions over the weekend. Terminated. But the Strait of Hormuz remains functionally closed. Terminated. But the Pentagon just asked for a $1.45 trillion defense budget, a 44% increase because of the war. IFMAT. The Pentagon has requested nearly $1.45 trillion for the coming year's budget, roughly 40% more than what the U.S. spent this fiscal year, as officials cited the need to restock munitions for the war. That figure may also not include supplemental financing for the war. Whatever we think we need, we will submit, Hegseth told Congress. Whatever we think we need, we will submit. No ceiling, no limit, no defined end. The war is terminated, but the spending requests are unlimited and open-ended. Congress is being asked to write a blank check for a war the administration says is already over. Washington Times. Now let's bring in the Harvard analysis, because this is where the credibility of the government's numbers completely collapses. Linda Bilmes, a leading Harvard economist, has predicted that the total cost of the war could amount to $1 trillion. Bilmes broke it down. The war is costing about $2 billion a day in short-term upfront costs, which is the tip of the iceberg. Wars always cost more than expected. Throughout history, those who get into wars tend to be optimistic about the cost and about the length of time it will take. Wikipedia. This is not a random academic making a political point. This is the same economist who in 2006 predicted the Iraq war would cost $2 trillion when the government was saying $50 billion. She was right. The government was wrong by a factor of 40. In 2013, Bilmes revised her estimations of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars and concluded the cost was actually closer to $4 trillion to $6 trillion. She and economist Joseph Stiglitz published a study in 2006 that found the true cost of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan topped $2 trillion, about 4 times greater than the Congressional Budget Office's projected $500 billion in direct spending. 4 times greater. And Bilmes believes the same pattern is playing out again right now, a government telling Congress and the public one number, while the real cost accumulates in veteran hospital beds, weapon replacement orders, infrastructure repair bills, and interest payments on borrowed money. Wikipedia. The White House has asked Congress to boost the U.S. defense budget to $1.5 trillion, the largest expansion in military spending since World War II. The figure doesn't include the $200 billion that the Pentagon has asked to be put aside for the war in Iran. Bilmes said that even if Congress does not agree to approve the full increase, it is highly likely that at least $100 billion per year will be added to the base defense budget that would not have been approved in the absence of this war. Before this war, Congress was lukewarm toward this idea, but the obvious depletion of many stockpiles and inventories and munitions is leading to an environment in which probably the president will secure a much larger increase to the defense budget, Bilmes said. Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. This is the hidden multiplier that nobody in the administration talks about. Every missile fired in Iran needs to be replaced. Every ship patrolling the strait burns fuel that needs to be paid for. Every base that was damaged needs to be repaired. And all of that replacement, all of that repair, all of that restocking happens in the years after the war. The government counts the cost of shooting the bullet. It doesn't count the cost of making a new one. Bilmes counts both, and her total reaches $1 trillion. The politics of this are becoming increasingly dangerous for the Trump administration. The Senate rejected a war powers resolution introduced by Senator Jeff Merkley, marking the 7th time the Senate has failed to advance such a resolution in a vote of 49 to 50. Another Republican has joined Democrats in voting for the war powers resolution, Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. She joined Republican Senator Rand Paul. Some Republicans, like Murkowski and Senator Tom Tillis, have argued Congress should have a role in authorizing the war, or at least more oversight, now that the conflict has stretched beyond 60 days. Al Jazeera. 7 votes. 7 times the Senate has tried to reassert congressional authority over this war. 7 times it has failed, but by razor-thin margins that are getting smaller each time. Republicans are starting to crack. The coalition that allowed Trump to launch and sustain this war without formal congressional authorization is fraying. And as the cost figure climbs, from $25 billion to $29 billion to the Harvard projection of $1 trillion, the political arithmetic is changing. As midterm elections approach, the rising cost of living is threatening Trump's promises to make America affordable again. Over the past year, Democrats have won a number of closely watched elections on affordability platforms. The midterms are coming. Voters are paying $4.52 for gas. Food prices are up 21%. And the president just said, on camera, that he doesn't think about Americans' financial situation. That is an opposition campaign ad that writes itself. Vision of humanity. Let's talk about what Congress is actually asking for, because at its core, this is not just a debate about numbers. It is a debate about democratic accountability. Top Republican Appropriations Chairman Tom Cole said, China is modernizing its military at a pace and scale that is alarming, expressing concern that the Iran war is diverting American attention and resources from the most important strategic challenge of the century. While America is spending $29 billion and counting in the Middle East, China is building carriers, hypersonic missiles, drone swarms, and AI-powered weapon systems at a speed that American defense officials describe as alarming. Every dollar spent on the Iran war is a dollar not spent preparing for the challenge that the entire U.S. military establishment considers most existential. Al Jazeera. And Congress cannot get basic answers. How much has the war cost, really? When will it end? What does victory actually look like? When asked if Iran is defeated, Trump said, "They're defeated militarily and they'll either do the right thing or we'll finish the job." Moments later, Trump added that he wouldn't say Iran is one of the topics he plans to discuss with Xi because the U.S. has it under control. "We're either going to make a deal or they're going to be decimated, one way or the other," Trump said. Defeated, but we'll finish the job. Under control, but either make a deal or be decimated. Victory. But the strait is closed. The ceasefire is on life support. Harvard says $1 trillion is coming, and the Senate just failed, for the 7th time, to pass a war powers resolution. Al Jazeera. Here is what the $29 billion bill actually represents, not as a number, but as a choice. It represents a choice to launch a war without a clear exit strategy. It represents a choice to fund that war entirely through debt, on top of $31 trillion already owed, while simultaneously cutting taxes. It represents a choice to tell Congress and the public the lowest possible cost figure while excluding veterans' care, base repairs, stockpile replacement, and interest payments. And it represents a choice made by the President of the United States on camera on May 12, 2026, not to think about Americans' financial situation. I am certain we will reach $1 trillion for the Iran war, Bilmes said. There are many dangers, but they are not all military threats. The military threats are real. The nuclear threat is real. The strategic stakes are real. But so is the $29 billion that just jumped $4 billion in 2 weeks. So is the $1 trillion that Harvard says is coming. So is the gas price that jumped the most in 60 years. So is the food bill that went up 21%. And so is the question that Congress, finally, loudly, in bipartisan harmony, is demanding an answer to. If the war is over, and Iran is defeated, and America has won, then why does the bill keep going up?